Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. What happens when faith meets the front lines? Join us as we sit down with Patricia Cecil, Specialist Curator of Faith, Religion, and World War I at the National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City. As America's National World War I Museum and a site that draws over 1.1 million visitors every year, it's home to the iconic Liberty Memorial and one of the world's largest collections of Great War artifacts. Patricia takes us behind the scenes of Sacred Service, an extraordinary exhibit revealing how chaplains became the unlikely helpers, healers, and mental health champions of their day. From 3D scans of century-old artifacts to untold stories of sacrifice, this conversation will change how you think about faith, war, and remembrance. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to Story Behind the Stone, where we talk service, sacrifice, and stories connecting you to the past and the most interesting people in the field of veteran causes and commemoration. My name is Ryan Mullins, along with Matthew Cudmore. We are with Memory Anchor, a company committed to using technology for good as we work at changing the way the world remembers. So today we're joined by Patricia, and she is a specialist curator of faith and religion and World War I with the National World War I Museum and Memorial. Thank you so much for joining us, Patricia.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan and Matthew. It's a pleasure to be here.
You have quite a title, and did I get that right?
You did, yes, yeah. So I'm the specialist curator for faith, religion, and World War I here at the National World War I Museum and Memorial. We're in Kansas City, Missouri.
But what does that title mean? What does your day look like?
As a curator, I work in the field of public history, but then also with material culture. So the physical things that people have created and left behind. And with the title for faith and religion and World War I look at the intersection of religion and conflict, or faith and conflict. So I look at that at the macro level and the micro level. So the macro level, how do nations and institutional religions understand, deal with, and dialogue with war? So for example, how do nations, how might they use religion for propaganda purposes? Or how might large institutional religions change due to conflict? I also look at faith on the micro level, so individual, personal, spiritual, and religious experiences. So there I look at how people change, how people's view of faith and understanding of faith changes and impacts war, and then also how war and conflict influences and changes people's faith, right? So you can go to war and have your faith strengthened, you can have it lost, you can have it tested, you can have it not changed at all, right? So that is all encompasses, my work encompasses all of those things. So from really large overhead view down to like the small individual personal experience.
Did you think that this is what you'd be doing when you grew up? Like, how did you end up in this position? It's so fascinating.
It's a really unique position. So it's not something that I specifically envisioned myself doing when I was younger, but I always knew that I wanted to work with history in the field of history. And I especially loved museums and cultural institutions. So when I was a child, I was really lucky. I got to travel around with my family a lot, and my parents are really big history buffs. So our travel always incorporated some sort of aspect of history. So whether it was going to a presidential library or Colonial Williamsburg or an old cathedral, like we're always touching some sort of aspect of history. And that just instilled in me a really huge passion for history. And I really especially loved going to the places where history happened and the places where they recorded and shared history with everyone, right? Like that educational aspect of it. And especially when it was tied with the actual stuff, that was just a huge excitement for me. So I knew that I wanted to work in museums in some way or cultural institutions. And then as I got older, learning about history, I learned that there was a lot in history that we don't really talk about, or especially we didn't really talk about when I was growing up. So sort of like lesser known stories in history. So not just sort of the national narratives that a lot of us grew up with, but sort of that other side of history, those really personal stories that don't get shared a lot. So actually I became really passionate about Native American history and the relationships that Native American communities have with museums. And that's what I focused on for a long time, was those telling the stories and helping Native American communities tell their own stories in museum spaces. And that has, so a lot of Native American communities and their cultural materials are deeply tied to spirituality. So that's how I kind of got the religion aspect brought into my work. So I ended up working at the University of Kansas in the Department of Religious Studies as an archivist for a while. I ran an archive where we collected and documented stories of religious diversity and experience in Kansas, and that really became a passion of mine. So then when they announced that this position was available at the National World War One Museum and Memorial, I was like, oh, that's everything. Like, that's everything I want to do. It's public history, it's material culture, it's spirituality and religion. And it's also, right, one of the great things about our mission here is enduring impact. So it's not just the time period itself, but how that time period, we still feel the reverberations of people's decisions 100 years ago today. So it was just sort of the perfect storm for me, this position. So that's how I got here.
Do you want to just tell me a little bit about your location and the significance of it?
So the National World War One Museum and Memorial, we're really fortunate to occupy a gorgeous monument. So it's known as the Liberty Memorial is the name of the tower itself. And it's a 217-foot tower that has 4 guardian spirits around the top. They're courage, honor, patriotism, and sacrifice. Those are the names of the 4 guardian spirits. And so they're on this tall cylindrical shaft. And at night, there's a lot of people think it was once a flame. It was never actually a flame. It's a steam effect and lighting. Sometimes we get people who, not so much anymore, but they're like, oh, when I was a child, I remembered when it was actually a flame at the top of the tower. It was never actually a flame. It was always steam. So it's this really gorgeous effect, though, right? At nighttime of this illuminated steam, it's supposed to look like a tower, a flame of inspiration is what it's called at the top. And H. Van Buren McGonigal, who is the architect that designed the memorial, he said his inspiration for the tower was in Exodus, the biblical story of Exodus, when Moses is leading the Jews out of Egypt. God appears as a pillar of cloud by day and a flame by night, and that's what this pillar is supposed to represent. And then on either side there are 2 halls. So this is the original memorial that was dedicated in 1926. There are 2 halls. There's Memory Hall and there's Exhibit Hall. Exhibit Hall was always sort of like the museum space because we've been collecting since 1921, since they started the institution. Exhibit Hall was sort of the space where they wanted to display items from the war, help remember people's sacrifice of the war. And then Memory Hall is a hall that we have these bronze tablets with 441 names of the war dead of Kansas City memorialized. We also have a section of the Pantheon de la Gare, which was this huge panoramic painting that was painted in France at the end of the war. It was a major attraction at the time. So these painters, you would walk into it in the round, and it was all the countries that took part in the war and sort of their major figures represented on this painting. So you could step inside and it was the round. That has its own story. It could be a whole other podcast just for the Pantheon. But basically, we ended up getting it in the 1950s. It had been like dismantled and kind of taken apart over time. But Daniel McMorris, an artist in Kansas City, tracked it down. He sort of repaired it, zhuzhed it up a little with his own 1950s Americana spin. And then so that's up as a mural inside Memory Hall. And there are a couple other murals by McMorris in that space too. So that's the original 1926 memorial, the tower and the 2 buildings. And then in 2006, they expanded and renovated the museum, which is the space that we occupy now, because we have over 350,000 objects that we've been collecting over the past 100 years. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, and well, you said you were 73 feet underground, so it probably keeps you cool in the summer, which is great.
The museum itself, they dug down underneath the memorial, built it out. Ralph Alphabaum and Associates designed it in 2006. We have this beautiful glass walkway that has 9,000 poppies underneath it, each poppy representing 1,000 deaths in World War I. We have our gorgeous main gallery section, and then we have a temporary gallery space, Wiley Gallery, where we rotate exhibits on a 2-year basis. And then we still do exhibits up in Exhibit Hall. And then Memory Hall is actually going to be its own unique exhibit space coming in 2026.
So you have all of these exhibits, and I hate asking this question because it's never fair, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is there something in particular in your museum or in your space that's one of your favorite things to visit?
Well, my favorite thing right now, I would say, is we have an exhibit going on called Sacred Service, and it's all about chaplains and the chaplain experience in World War I. And it's actually such a unique exhibit because it's the only place I know of in the world right now, or really that's ever been, where you can see the chaplain experience represented from all belligerent nations in the conflict. So we look at a diversity of faiths represented by chaplains. So Christian, Jewish, Orthodox Christian, Roman Catholic, Muslim. We even talk about the Buddhist fighters that were coming and fighting from the colonies from like Great Britain, North African soldiers fighting for France. So we talk about all of the faiths that World War I touched and their faith experiences, and especially those of chaplains, right? These religious leaders who were put in these positions that, frankly, a lot of them were completely unprepared for, right? Like most chaplains were non-combatants. They were coming from a background where, they had been to college and they had ministered to people, but they had never been in a situation where they're having bullets being shot at them or
Mm,
having to counsel men who are in severe distress, right? So they're pretty unprepared for it. And really what happens that we find in World War I is this huge transformation of chaplains, their own spirituality, and then their experiences that then reverberate through the 20th century based on what they witnessed and those who lived through World War I, what then they brought back to their faith communities, building a responsive faith for people, a much less dogmatic faith. We think about like faith in the 19th century, the 1800s. It's pretty dogmatic. It's like you follow the rules. You either do a good job and you go to heaven, or you don't do a good job and you go to hell. And if you're not showing up to church on Sunday, then you're just doing a terrible job. This all really changed with World War I because we get a lot of these leaders and these chaplains being in this situation, being like, this isn't really helping anyone right now. Like, what we need to do is build faith systems that are responsive to people, that meet people where they are, that say, how can I help you in this situation, right? So we get the more 20th century understanding of faith that we start to see borne out into the 20th century. So tolerance, ecumenicalism, working together across faiths and between faiths, and that really all comes out of World War I and people's faith experience, right, in these harrowing conditions.
yeah, I've read a lot of books and the chaplains, especially in World War II, where they're doing extreme unction, they're doing first aid, they're supporting even civilian populations, but they have to be a little bit of everything, don't they? We've come a long way when we looked at what was used to be called shell shock in the First World War, and to battle fatigue in the second, and now we know kind of post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress injury. But the psychological support of soldiers, I would imagine it would have rested almost solely on these individuals.
Absolutely. And that's something that we share in sacred service, right? We're all pretty familiar, most of us, if we kind of have a history or military or even religious background, we understand chaplains or have a general notion of sort of the worship services or sacramental celebrations that chaplains were there to provide. But really what came out of this and all of the research uh, that came out of preparing for sacred service was that chaplains were the mental health professionals of their day in World War I, right? Like, this was a time before really any basic mental health services, especially in like a military setting. And chaplains were the boots on the ground who were sort of the first in line to help soldiers deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, to deal with or shell shock, as they called it back then. They were the ones who were writing letters back home to soldiers' families. They were the ones who were counseling men. If they were, for example, at Father Duffy, he's a really famous American chaplain from World War I. He was the chaplain for the fighting 69th Regiment, and we actually have his confessional stool on loan to us from World War I from the U.S. Chaplain Corps Museum in sacred service, right? And it is just this really powerful piece because you think of those moments when he would have been providing the sacrament of reconciliation to a soldier or counseling them, providing absolution for this person that was probably going through this absolute horrific moment, and thinking about the courage, the spiritual comfort that this would have brought. It's really powerful. And we have writings where we have soldiers in the 69th who weren't even Catholic, and but they would go to see Father Duffy for confession before battle because they just felt such an overwhelming calm and comfort from him. So we see this all the time in the chaplains of World War One. You know, they were not only the stretcher bearers, they were also the first aid givers, right? A lot of them had basic medical training, so they were the ones rushing into no man's land and pulling people back. And they were also the people listening, you know, to the soldiers in their bunkers later on because they had no one else to talk to. So they really were uh, the the counselors, the friends that were there for service members during World War One.
I'm kind of drawn actually on my own personal experience. I remember when I was serving, I was on deployment, domestic operation, and I had a tragic loss of a family member, and it was shocked me. And as you're talking about this, I had of course my friends who came to support me, but they brought me to the chaplain, and I can't remember his name. I'm getting a little emotional, but he sat with me in that moment where I had this tragedy, and I don't wouldn't have that religious background or anything, but what he offered me was so important and so needed. I just had a space to sit, and he listened, and that's a loss of a family member. And you think what these individuals are doing in the First World War, that creates a lot of empathy and just what that service was to those individuals, and the burden that must have taken on them, the vicarious trauma, and what they held, and so um it's I think that importance and your exhibit, again, another thing that's just drawing me to that. What is the big takeaway you want people to really, when they're coming in and seeing the exhibit you put together? Like, what is the thing that you want people to be taking away?
I think my main takeaway, there's this really great sort of, and I'll paraphrase it, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, he had this saying, when there are tragedies, when there are bad events, what do? You look for the helpers. And that's really what this exhibit was for me, right? Like it was my love letter to the helpers of World War One. Like these were men, most of them, unless you were French, the French priests did carry guns and because of secular laws had to engage in combat. But for most other nations, every other nation, chaplains were non-combatants. They were not armed. They were not there to hurt anyone, to kill anyone, to fight. They were there solely to provide comfort and to provide courage, to provide a listening ear to people who were going through things that I think for us in 2025, for majority of us, thankfully, are absolutely unimaginable. Things that we can't even fathom witnessing. You read accounts of World War One, and I won't go into them because you can read them everywhere. They're on the internet. I mean, really horrifying things. This was mass industrialized warfare on a scale that no one had ever seen before, or no one could even comprehend when they went into this in the summer of 1914, what that would look like. The technology changed and scaled so rapidly. The destruction was from humans to horses to landscape, would just annihilated things. And so you're having people witnessing these things that have no vocabulary, no framework for understanding them. And who's there? Who are the helpers? In World War One, it was the chaplains. They were the first person that you would run into or meet if you were in distress. And so that's really what this exhibit is, and what I hope people take away from it is even in the most extreme, horrific situations, there are reserves within us where we can show up and be those people, be those helpers for other people in those moments of need.
It's a lesson, we can take into our modern day, is, looking at that dedication and the integrity and the values that these individuals lived by. And, we can be called to some pretty extreme events to show that courage. I love that Fred Rogers quote. I think that's very fitting.
Several months ago, you also launched a digital initiative with Sacred Service. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came together, the challenges, and kind of the unique approach you're delivering the digital aspect. Because I thought that was really inspiring work that you did.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so there's a digital exhibition version of Sacred Service. And so it has about 10 to 15 objects that are from the exhibition, but they, unlike the exhibition, they're accessible anywhere in the world to anyone who has an internet connection and a computer or a smartphone, right? So you can see them anywhere you are. You don't have to pay an admission price. You don't have to come to Kansas City, and you can see these beautiful objects. One of the best things I think about the digital exhibition is we've harnessed this new technology. So it's 3D scanning technology. So we can actually get a complete scan of an object, top, bottom, front, back, all around, inside out. And so we've utilized this technology in the digital exhibition. So wherever you are in the world, you can get as close, actually probably closer, a
Yeah.
closer in detail view of the object than you would even in person, right? Because when you're in person, you have the glass there, you can't get. This technology allows you to zoom in on an object, zoom out on an object, see it in incredible detail. And then, of course, we have the wonderful supporting historical interpretation for each of those scans and objects that really sort of illuminate what makes that object special and then ties it into the overall story of the chaplain experience in World War One.
Can you spotlight one of those images for us? We're going to include links in the show notes about these objects and the exhibition. But is there one that you wanted to spotlight just now?
Absolutely. So there's a chaplain's kit. And so for those who aren't familiar with chaplains or their work, a chaplain's kit, especially in World War One, it has everything you need to worship or perform a sacrament. Especially, I'm talking here really about Christian chaplains. So it looks like, if you would imagine, like a briefcase, just a leather briefcase. But then you open it up and it's lined with velvet, and inside there are all these perfect little compartments where all these special objects nestle. So for example, one of the communion kits that we have on display in Sacred Service is a British Anglican communion kit. So it's Protestant, British, Anglican, so Church of England. And so inside he had everything that he would need to perform communion out in the field. And it's like a briefcase, so he could take it with him wherever. So whether he was in a trench, if he was on the battlefield, if he was on a ship going somewhere, if he was traveling, he had everything he would need right with him. And it's all those, really beautiful sacramental objects, when you think about like a high Christian church service and everything is shiny and sparkly, and pretty, everything's gold or glass. It looks very special. All these objects are inside this just sort of old leather beat up case. And it's really beautiful, right? Because it illustrates so well what chaplains had to do. They had to be everywhere all the time and ready to help someone at a moment's notice from,
Yeah.
from the littlest thing, from giving someone a cigarette, which many of them did. There's one of my favorite chaplains. He was nicknamed Woodbine Willie, G.A. Studdert Kennedy. He was a British chaplain, and he was known, he spent he spent thousands of dollars of his own money just on cigarettes to hand out to soldiers, and that they were Woodbine cigarettes. That's how he got the nickname Woodbine Willie, because 98% of men in World War One smoked. So right, so it was these small things, from a cigarette, a little bit of comfort, a cigarette in the trench, to opening up your communion set and performing, celebrating communion for people. I think it illustrates in such a beautiful way just sort of the jack of all trades nature that chaplains had to embody in World War One. And it's beautiful, beautiful things.
As you're talking, I'm just going through your catalog of 3D images and looking at them and spinning them around. We absolutely love the 3D scans. That's something we use as well. And the reason being is it lets people engage and interact with these objects that you wouldn't be able to touch. Even the field communion set here, you can see the age with the handle falling off. It's something you don't want to handle, but getting a
Mhm.
sense of the object and looking at it, and the pictures that go along with it are wonderful. And so we'll include that in the show notes, because I think it's important for people to really see this. And it's great seeing your museum using this kind of emerging technology in new ways, because this is it's a different way to engage people in the stories, right? Even taking a look at the chaplain's tunic, the uniform.
Hmm.
This allows people to look at it, and youth in particular to maybe engage with something that is in a bit of a different medium. How did this idea come to you? The use of technology in this commemoration.
We've always been, risk takers, I think, here at the museum and memorial. That's something that I was, lucky to come into when I started in 2021. We have leadership that is really supportive of us taking risks and trying new things. And digital technology is one of those things, and we've embraced it. And like you said, it's such a great way to share these stories with people that may not engage with them otherwise. And it's just a part of the world that we live in today, right? It's 2025. Digital technologies are such a part of our lives in so many places. It just, to me, it's a natural fit to then embrace those and use those to tell these stories, because they can really take them to a level that we've never really been able to get to before in the realm of public history, right? And we have people who engage with this material on these platforms in other ways, right? Like we think of people who play, first person video games or things. There's so many that have historical narratives. And so it's a natural fit, I think, for us to embrace that in a museum space. It's a great, exciting way to tell those stories. And I think it's really liberating to do it in a lot of ways too, right? Like by not just being limited to the physical walls of a museum space, by using these digital technologies, we can reach people almost anywhere. And that's incredible. That's phenomenal for our mission.
There's a way to expand your message, your offer, well beyond, the walls of the museum. And when you have artifacts like this that, you know, you go into some museums. I used to work at the military museums in Calgary. The amount of artifacts that are just amazing that aren't on display, that people don't get to
Hmm.
see, because, as curators, you have to choose what you're showing. And
Yeah.
otherwise you overwhelm people, or it could look like a flea market. Uh, right? If it's You have to be able to tell a story, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, technology enables that storytelling in a different way, doesn't it?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, like you said, I mean, about 80% of our collection is behind closed doors. So at any given time, it's only about 20% of our collection that the public is seeing at a given time. So we have all these wonderful things with all these different stories that a lot of times we just can't display, because they're either, we don't have a specific exhibition for it, or it's not a good fit for something in our main gallery. But they are wonderful objects that have, frankly, most of the time, really exciting stories behind them, especially here, so to be able to share more of them with more people, I mean, I think that's a win-win for everyone.
I wanted to go back. You mentioned, there's 441 war dead from Kansas City. Is there a story in that list that you gravitate to, or that has resonated with you, or hits you deep in the heart?
One of the ones that stands out to me the most is Lottie Hollenbeck, and she's the one and only female on our list of 441 out of Kansas City, and she was a nurse. Um, I think her story is really interesting. One, because she's the only female represented, but two, she tells this such a really great story about nursing in World War One. And she was a young woman. She was a local graduate of the college, the nursing college here in Kansas City, and I think she was assigned to Base Hospital 28 and ended up going out to Fort Riley, Kansas. And it's 1918 when this is happening. So the influenza outbreak is upon everyone. And she ends up dying of influenza at Fort Riley. And she died within like 42 hours. She got sick, and 42 hours later she was dead, which what happened so much. That's something we discovered with the 441 database. So the number one cause of death was wounds received in action, or died in action. Number two was disease, and by and large, it was mostly pneumonia due to complications from influenza. And you can just really see really starkly when you look at that data, just how devastating the influenza pandemic in 1918 was, and just how many lives it decimated. So I think she's a great story. Um, there are also the Carson brothers, which I think is a really poignant story. Rennick and Robert Carson. They were 2 years apart in birth, but they died within 4 days of each other. One was in the Army and one was in the Marines. They were in completely two separate places. But in the fall of 1918, both died within 4 days. And I just think about their parents and just how devastating that would be to know that, to experience that. But, those are just a handful. There are so many on that
Yeah.
list that have really beautiful, unique stories. We had so many actually that we discovered that were young men who went into Canadian service. They joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force,
Mm-hmm.
and either because they were originally from Canada and they were down in Kansas City working on the railroad. So then they went back and enlisted in the Canadian forces and went over. Or, like, for example, we had this one young man who was in school. He was at Baker University. And in 1916, he went up with friends to work on the wheat harvest in Calgary, I think, up at the wheat harvest. And he joined up over there in the summer.
Mhm.
He just didn't come back home. And he was like, no, and he joined the CEF, and he was killed in Passchendaele. So, just that's the thing about the databases. We have all these statistics and we can say, most of them died because of this or during this time. But when you drill it down, the stories are so unique, and each person had their story. And it just becomes so powerful when you encounter them that way.
Of course, Calgary being our hometown, and hearing that. And I just actually finished mapping out Tynecott, which is the Passchendaele Cemetery. So I'm sure he's buried there, and I would have marked his grave, and and that's that little connection, and it really it shows the connection between our two countries. Both in the First and Second World War, we had a lot of Americans called to service, and since we were in the war quite early, especially Second World War, tons of pilots coming
Hmm.
up from the States, and then vice versa into Vietnam. As we wrap up here, Patricia, is there, how do people connect and engage with your content, and what's next for you? What's on the horizon?
We have a wealth of digital exhibitions that we've done over the past few years that people can see and visit on our website, theworldwar.org. Of course, people are welcome to come and visit us. We're in Kansas City, Missouri. 2026 is our centennial celebration. So next year we are going to be celebrating 100 years of remembering and interpreting the Great War. So we're celebrating our big 100th anniversary. America is celebrating her 250th. So we've got a lot of great history events coming up in 2026. And then also we're the Fan Fest host site for the FIFA World Cup in 2026. So we're going to have an exhibition on soccer in World War I coming, and just lots of fun, exciting, great things going on our grounds. So really, really exciting things in the year ahead.
Well, it sounds like a lot of stuff worthwhile checking out. So to our listeners, please check the show notes to look for some of those links. Take time, go on Google, look up the museum, have a look at everything they're doing. A lot of stuff coming in 2026. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Matthew. This has been a blast.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Reach Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Reach Across Radio network. Thank you for tuning in.